Every pattern you repeat or every choice you can't explain and every version of yourself you keep returning to has a blueprint. Welcome to the Echo Principle, where we map the unseen architecture of human behavior. If you think carefully, you belong here, so drop a like and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Kim Peek could read 2 pages of a book simultaneously. One eye on the left page, one eye on the right page. He could do this in about 8 seconds. And he would remember everything on both pages, permanently, with near-perfect accuracy. He did this with 12,000 books over the course of his life. Entire encyclopedias, phone directories, maps, musical scores, the complete works of Shakespeare, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the full timetables of every major American road and railway. All of it stored, all of it retrievable, all of it available on demand with a precision that no computer database of his era could match. And Kim Peek could not button his shirt. He could not manage basic personal hygiene without help. He could not drive a car, handle money reliably, or navigate the social dynamics of a simple conversation with a stranger. He needed his father Fran by his side every day of his adult life just to function in the world. The same brain that held 12,000 books could not perform tasks that most 4-year-olds manage without thinking. That is not a metaphor for anything. That is just what was true. And the question of how both of those things could exist inside one skull is the question that takes us somewhere very few people have thought carefully about. Kim Peek was born in 1951 in Salt Lake City, Utah. He came into the world with a head significantly larger than normal. Doctors discovered that he had been born without a corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerve fibers that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain and allows them to communicate. He also had damage to the cerebellum, the region at the back of the brain responsible for motor coordination and balance. And he had a condition called macrocephaly, an abnormally enlarged brain. The doctors who examined him as an infant told his parents that he would never walk, never talk, never be capable of meaningful social interaction. They recommended institutionalization. His father Fran refused. Kim began reading at 18 months. By the time he was 3 years old, he had memorized every book in the family home. By 6 he had read and retained the entire Bible. The doctors who had predicted he would never speak were wrong about almost everything. But they were not wrong that something was profoundly different about how Kim Peek's brain was organized. They were just wrong about what that difference would produce. The condition Kim Peek had is called Savant syndrome. It is not a diagnosis in the traditional sense, it is a descriptor. It refers to individuals who display extraordinary, almost inexplicable abilities in one or more specific domains, typically alongside significant cognitive or developmental limitations in other areas. The word savant comes from the French word for knowing. And the phenomenon has been documented in the medical literature since 1887, when a British physician named John Langdon Down, the same Down who described Down syndrome, published a paper on what he called idiot savants. That terminology is no longer used. But the phenomenon Down was describing is real, documented, and still not fully understood. Savant syndrome appears in roughly 1 in 10 people with autism spectrum disorder. It also appears in people with other forms of brain damage or developmental difference. And in rare cases it appears suddenly in previously neurotypical adults following a brain injury or the onset of a neurological condition. These acquired savants, as they are called, offer some of the most striking evidence for what the savant paradox is really pointing at. Because their abilities did not develop over years of practice. They appeared, almost overnight, from damage. To understand why damage can produce extraordinary ability, you have to understand something about how the brain normally allocates its resources. The dominant model in neuroscience for most of the 20th century was one of relatively fixed localization. The idea that specific brain regions handle specific functions, and that damage to those regions produces specific deficits. This is partially true, Broca's area handles speech production. The hippocampus is central to memory formation. The visual cortex processes visual input. These localizations are real and they are consistent across individuals. But the brain is not a simple map of fixed functions. It is a dynamic, competitive system. Regions compete for cortical real estate. And the balance of that competition is shaped by use, by experience, and by the presence or absence of competing systems. When a region is damaged or absent, neighboring regions do not simply lose their neighbor. In many cases they expand into the vacated territory. They colonize the space. And sometimes, in doing so, they develop capacities that the previously balanced system never would have produced. This is called paradoxical functional facilitation, a term coined by the neurologist Vilayanu Ramachandran. The idea that damage to one system can release or amplify the function of another. In Kim Peek's case, the absence of the corpus callosum meant that his two hemispheres never developed the standard division of labor that characterizes most human brains. Normally, the corpus callosum mediates a constant negotiation between the hemispheres. It allows them to specialize, to divide cognitive tasks between them, and to coordinate those specializations into unified experience. Without it, something different happened in Kim Peek's brain. Researchers who studied him, including the neurologist Darold Treffert who spent decades documenting Savant syndrome, believed that without the corpus callosum acting as a filter and coordinator, Kim's brain developed massive compensatory neural pathways. Direct connections between regions that in a typical brain would communicate only indirectly and only through the corpus callosum as an intermediary. His memory system, in particular, appeared to operate without the normal inhibitory processes that in a typical brain prevent most incoming information from being permanently encoded. Most of what you experience right now will not be in your memory tomorrow. Your brain filters aggressively. It decides what matters and discards the rest. Kim Peek's brain did not do this. Or it did it far less efficiently. And the result was retention on a scale that has no real parallel in the documented history of human cognition. The man who brought Kim Peek to global attention was not a neurologist. He was a screenwriter named Barry Morrow. Morrow met Kim Peek at a conference in 1984 and spent several hours with him. He was so overwhelmed by what he encountered that he wrote a screenplay about a fictional savant loosely inspired by Kim. That screenplay became the 1988 film Rain Man, starring Dustin Hoffman as Raymond Babbitt. Hoffman won the Academy Award. The film won Best Picture. And overnight the concept of the savant entered popular culture in a way that no academic paper had managed. But the popularization came with a cost. Raymond Babbitt was a composite, a fictional character. And the image of the savant that Rain Man put into the cultural imagination was specific and limiting. The socially withdrawn, emotionally flat, obsessively routine-bound individual whose extraordinary ability exists in a kind of sealed chamber, separate from the rest of human experience. Kim Peek was not like this. He was warm, funny, deeply interested in people. He loved wordplay and puns. He was genuinely joyful in social interaction even when he struggled with its mechanics. The stereotype that Rain Man produced was not Kim Peek. But the world decided it was. What the neuroscientific study of Kim Peek and other savants reveals about memory is worth dwelling on because it challenges some of the most basic assumptions about what memory is for. We tend to think of a good memory as simply a better version of a normal memory. More storage, faster retrieval, higher fidelity. But the memory that savants like Kim Peek display is not just quantitatively different from typical memory. It appears to be qualitatively different. Operating on different principles, using different mechanisms, serving different functions. Typical human memory is reconstructive. When you remember something, you are not retrieving a stored file. You are rebuilding it from fragments, filling in gaps with inference and expectation, shaping it to fit your current understanding and emotional state. This is why eyewitness testimony is unreliable. This is why your memory of an argument differs from the other person's memory of the same argument. Memory in typical human cognition is not a recording. It is a story you tell yourself, revised with each retelling. Savant memory appears to work differently. It is closer to a recording. Less interpretive, less reconstructive, less shaped by narrative and emotion. And this difference, this very thing that makes it seem superior, may actually explain some of the functional limitations that accompany it. The neurologist Darold Treffert, who studied Savant syndrome for over 40 years, proposed a framework that helps make sense of this paradox. Treffert distinguished between what he called explicit and implicit memory systems, and argued that savants like Kim Peek appeared to have an extraordinarily powerful explicit memory system operating with reduced integration from the higher-order interpretive systems that in typical brains shape and filter memory. The higher-order systems are not just adding noise to memory. They are adding meaning. They are the systems that take raw information and embed it in context, connect it to other knowledge, evaluate its relevance, and make it usable for abstract reasoning and social navigation. When those systems are reduced or reorganized, the raw recording capacity can expand dramatically. But the ability to use that information flexibly, to apply it to novel situations, to read between the lines of a social exchange, to understand implication and subtext and emotional nuance, these abilities suffer. Kim Peek could tell you the population of every city in the United States in 1960. He could not reliably tell you what a stranger's expression meant. There is a researcher named Allan Snyder at the University of Sydney who has spent years pursuing a radical hypothesis about savant abilities. Snyder's argument is that the extraordinary capacities demonstrated by savants are not the product of something extra that their brains have. They are the product of something missing. Specifically, Snyder argues that typical human brains actively suppress access to raw, unprocessed sensory and cognitive data. That the higher-order conceptual systems that give us language and abstraction and social cognition do so partly by filtering out lower-level processing. And that savants, through various forms of brain difference or damage, have reduced access to those filters, giving them direct access to a level of processing that typical brains cannot reach consciously. Snyder tested this hypothesis using transcranial magnetic stimulation, a technique that temporarily inhibits specific brain regions using magnetic pulses. He applied TMS to the left anterior temporal lobe of neurotypical subjects, temporarily inhibiting the higher-order language and conceptual systems, and found that some subjects showed transient improvements in tasks requiring precise perceptual detail. The savant window briefly opened by switching off the editor. Kim Peek was studied extensively by a team of researchers including the neurologist Daniel Christensen in the years before his death. What the imaging studies of his brain revealed was genuinely unusual even by the standards of savant research. The absence of the corpus callosum had not simply left a gap. It had been accompanied by a reorganization of neural architecture that was unlike anything the researchers had documented before. His brain had developed direct connections between regions that in typical brains are separated by multiple synaptic relays. The right hemisphere, which in most people plays a supporting role in language and memory, appeared in Kim Peek to be functioning as an equal or even dominant partner in memory encoding and retrieval. Both hemispheres were doing work that in a typical brain only one hemisphere would do. And the result was a memory system with what researchers described as redundant encoding. Information was being stored in multiple ways simultaneously, through multiple pathways, which may explain both the extraordinary durability of his memories and his inability to forget even trivial or irrelevant information. He remembered everything because his brain had no efficient mechanism for deciding what was not worth remembering. The broader implications of the savant paradox extend well beyond the study of rare neurological conditions. Because what Kim Peek and others like him reveal is that the standard model of intelligence, the model that IQ tests measure, the model that grades in school reward, the model that most of us use implicitly when we assess our own and other people's cognitive worth, is not measuring something fundamental about human cognition. It is measuring a specific profile of cognitive trade-offs. A particular balance between raw processing power and the higher order systems that make that processing socially and practically useful. Kim Peek had an IQ score in the range of 87. Below average by the standard definition. And yet he possessed a cognitive capacity that no human being on Earth could match and that no artificial system of his era could replicate. The IQ score did not fail to capture this because IQ tests are badly designed. It failed to capture it because IQ tests are designed to measure something real, and what they are measuring is genuinely different from what Kim Peek had. Both things were real. They just could not coexist in the same number. Kim Peek died on December 19, 2009, of a heart attack. He was 58 years old. In the final years of his life, after Rain Man brought him international attention, he and his father Fran traveled extensively, meeting people, giving talks, demonstrating his abilities to researchers and to the public. Fran Peek described watching his son interact with thousands of people in those years. And what he described was not a man performing his abilities. It was a man who had found, in the attention and curiosity of others, something that his extraordinary brain had always struggled to give him. Connection. Kim Peek could hold 12,000 books in his memory. He could tell you what day of the week any date in history fell on. He could recite the zip codes of every city in the United States. And what he wanted, more than any of it, was for people to be kind to one another. He said this repeatedly. In interviews, in public appearances, in conversations with strangers. It was his consistent message. The man with the most extraordinary memory in documented human history, and the thing he most wanted you to remember was to be kind. This has been the echo principle. We map the unseen blueprints of human behavior. The most powerful mind ever documented wanted nothing more than what the simplest mind also wants. To be seen, and to be met with warmth. We will see you in the next one.